Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, my dear students. This is Dr. Mohammed Shafiq, Lecturer of Philosophy, Department of Islamic and Pakistan Studies Trust. The course I'm teaching is called Introduction to Logic, and the course code is PHI 101. This is lecture number 21, and today we are going to discuss how we can check the validity of our categorical syllogism with the help of Venn diagram technique.
Venn diagram technique. So it is a kind of technique. We have already discussed it in the previous lecture. We showed the diagrammatic representation of individual four propositions, categorical proposition, that is A, E, I, O. Now today we will check the validity of the syllogism. So we have already discussed syllogism, different types of syllogism, but today we will be knowing about the techniques that is applied to a syllogism which of the premises of which are all universal in nature. Now lastly we will discuss the outcome of this lecture. So students, if you remember, in the previous lecture we showed in the individual diagrammatic representation of four categorical proposition. So we got these type of results: all SSP, SP bar is equal to 0, no SSP, SP is equal to 0, some SSP, SP is not equal to 0, some S is not P, SP bar is not equal to 0. Here we have, to recap it, we have the individual diagrammatic representation of all SSP, that means a universal affirmative, like all Americans are farmers or all human beings are mammals. So we showed it in the previous lecture. Suppose if we say S is a class of human beings, so they are human beings, but they're not mammals. They are human beings and mammal as well. They are only mammals, but they are not human beings. So we had already discussed it that we will have to shade this area of the proposition. Next, suppose in categorical syllogism, then we also discuss the major term, minor term, and the middle term as well. If you remember, the subject of the conclusion of the syllogism was the minor term, as M is actually the middle term, and the P, the predicate of the syllogism, of the conclusion of the syllogism, is known as major term. So suppose if we want to diagram all S is M, so actually we are using those terms, because in syllogism we will be using the middle term as well, because in both of the premises the middle term appears. So suppose if I say all S is M, so it's SM bar, SM, S bar, M. So suppose if I say all sportsmen are musicians, so this is a class of sportsmen, but they're not musicians. This is a class of sportsmen, and they are musicians as well. These are only musicians, but they are not sportsmen. Now, what we will have to do, we will have to shade this area, because our individual proposition says like that all the members of the class of sportsmen should be included in the class of musicians. So here is the area. Here are the members which are not included in the class of musicians. So we will have to shade it. By shading means we mean when we make a class empty. So imagine if this is empty, so all the sportsmen will be in the class of musician. Now we have E proposition, no SSP. If you remember, we already know about the diagrammatic representation of E proposition. We shaded this area, this class of SP. So in no SSP, SP is equal to 0. So students, as far as all SSP is concerned, we put a bar on the second one at P bar, the second alphabet, SP bar is equal to 0, as I have already shown it in the original proposition. So we will have to follow the same pattern. All S is M, so we will put bar on the second alphabet, M bar. And if we say all M is S, so we will have to put bar on the second one, that is MS bar. Same is the case with all P is M, all M is P. So you will have to follow this pattern. And I have already shown in different example, to different examples. Now we have E proposition, no SSP, the original proposition, which we have already discussed in the previous slides. So SP bar is equal to 0. So there is no bar on any alphabet. So we will have you will have to follow again the same pattern. No S is M, so you don't need to put any bar on SM. So SM is equal to 0. No P is M, PM is equal to 0. So same is the case with I. In I, if you remember, we put X on in the area that is SP, and SP is not equal to 0. We put X over there in the area of SP. So it means that if we say like some S is M, so you will have to put, because it's a combination of two clauses S and M, so SM is not equal to 0. You will have to put X in the area of X, in the area of SM. If you say some M is S, so you will have to put X in the area of MS clause. Same would be the case with O proposition. In O proposition, if you remember, some S is not P. We have already discussed it. SP bar is not equal to 0. Now, some S is not M. SM bar is not equal to 0. Now, again, you will have to follow the same pattern. And the second alphabet, which represent actually a class, that is P, there is a bar. So we will have to put a bar on the second one as well. Though I have already discussed it in the previous slides in different diagrams. And if we say some P is not M, PM bar is not equal to 0. So we will again put bar on the second one, PM, because it's a combination of two clauses, P, M, M. Some M is not P, MP bar is not equal to 0. Some M is not P, MP bar is not equal to 0. This is repeated. Now, if you remember, in the previous lecture, we discussed the form of syllogism, and we discussed the mood of syllogism. By mood, we mean what type of categorical propositions have been used, or by figure, we means the position of the middle term, which actually the middle term appears in 4 different figures. So this is actually figure 1, if you remember. So now today we will check the validity of this argument. All primates are mammal, all human beings are primates, therefore all human beings are mammals. So S is the minor term, P is the middle term, P is the major term, sorry. Now in the premise we have the middle term in the very beginning of the first premise. Then we have major term, then we have minor term, and then we have middle term. So the conclusion is actually like this. SP, it's always SP. Student, you must remember, most of the time, the student they commit a mistake. The standard form categorical syllogism means that the major premise should be the first one, then the minor premise, and then the conclusion. Now, so if all M is P, so in all S is P, we already discussed SP bar is equal to 0, so here we get the result MP bar is equal to 0. So all S is M, SM bar is equal to 0, so as all S is P is equal, in all S is P, SP bar is equal to 0, we put a bar on the second alphabet, so we will again put a bar on the second SM bar. So all S is P, SP bar is equal to 0. Now this is categorical syllogism that is AAA1. The form is AAA1. Now, how to check its validity? So we get this type of result: all m is p, mp bar is equal to 0, all s is m, sm bar is equal to 0, all s is p, sp bar is equal to 0. So actually that syllogism, which was in ordinary language, in English language, now it is converted into a symbolic form. Now let's move to the next slide. Now we have this diagram. So we have three different terms, like this minor term, that is S, we have the major term, that is P, and we have the middle term, that is M. Now we will have to overlap all these three circles, because each circle represents a specific class. And then we will put, sorry, I haven't put it SPM over here. There's some technical issues. I lack those IT skills. So SPM bar, why we put bar on these two? Because this is a class of S, but here is no member of the class of P, because all the members of the class of P are inside this circle, and all the members of the class of M are inside this circle. So it's S. We don't put a bar on S because it is a class of S, but we put bar on P and M as well, because there are no members of the class of P and M. Here we have another class. It's a class of P, but here are no members of the class of S and class of M. So bar means when there are no members of the particular class. So here we have another class, that is the class of M. So here are no members of the class of S and P as well. This is the area. This is the area which is shared by class of M and class of P. But here, no members of the class of S exist. So we put bar only on S. And this is the area which is shared by the class of S and M. So we don't put bars on S and M, but we put bar on P. And this is the area where there are members of both the class of P and S, but there is no member of class of M, because M, the class of M lies underneath. Now this area is an area in which all the members of the three classes exist, in which the members of all the three classes exist. Now, what we will have to do now, students, you will have to look at this one, all MSP, that we got the result from the previous slides. MP bar is equal to 0. Now, first of all, you will have, which means that MP bar is equal to 0, you will have to shade the area of MP bar. Now we have MP bar, this is MP bar. Don't bother about the third one. You will have just to look for the MP bar, whether it is S or S bar, it doesn't matter. MP bar. Now I have shaded it. Now we have the second premise, all S is M, SM bar is equal to 0. Now we have SM bar and SM bar. Now you are supposed to shade it as well, this one as well. As far as the conclusion is concerned, remember it, that you are not supposed to diagram the conclusion. I again repeat that you are not supposed to diagram the conclusion. Why? Because you are only supposed to look for the conclusion after diagramming the premises. Now, what does the conclusion say? The conclusion say SP bar is equal to 0, which means that the area of SP bar should be shaded. Now, we look over here, SP bar, this is shaded, and this is also shaded. This is actually a S bar, P bar, this is not SP bar. So this is shaded, this is shaded. So it means that our argument is valid, because we find the conclusion when we diagram these premises. In other words, these premises supports the conclusion. Actually, those premises were like uh, all primates are mammals, all human beings are primates, therefore all human beings are mammals. Or any other syllogism of this form that is actually AAA1. Another thing you must remember, suppose now you will have to know about this techniques a little bit more. Another thing you must remember, suppose if we had diagram all these premises, these two premises, and we don't find SP bar is shaded, then we will call it invalid. Either this one or both. If they are unshaded, but now they are shaded, actually that's why we call it valid. So then the argument would be an invalid one. Now in the next lecture we will be discussing I will also show those diagrammatic technique about the AA2, AA3 and AA4 and other universal other syllogism containing universal proposition. Just wait for a while, wait for a few lectures. After a few lectures, we will be discussing the technique of those particular proposition like I and O. Just concentrate on syllogism containing only universal proposition. So here are the references. A Concise Introduction to Logic by Patrick Hurley, and Introduction to Logic by Irving M. Copy, Carl Cohen, Kenneth McMahon, 14th edition, Pearson's Education Limited, 2014. Student, another thing, though we have some technical limitations, I think if anyone has any problems, so we could also arrange a class on Google Meet as well, so in order to facilitate you. So in the next lecture, we will be discussing some other syllogism, and we will check the validity and invalidity of all those propositions, of all those syllogism. Thank you very much indeed.